He was followed, cornered, and beaten not because he broke the law, but because he was a big black man walking through the wrong neighborhood. No arrest warrant, no complaint, no reason, just the wrong skin tone in the wrong zip code. They didn't expect him to fight back, legally, strategically, and publicly. They didn't know every insult, every shove, every unlawful stop was part of his plan. This isn't a story about a man caught in injustice. It's about a man who lured injustice into the light. Because while they thought they were hunting him, he was already recording them. Before the sirens, before the cuffs, before the lies. He saw it coming, and he turned the trap back on them. Watch this carefully. This isn't fiction. It's a system exposed frame by frame. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. What moment hits hardest for you? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the full series. This isn't just a takedown. It's the beginning of something bigger. Zeke Ward had never been a reckless man, and that morning was no exception. He arrived at Walter Pines Park at exactly 9:15 a.m., parking legally in the public lot, checking both the time restrictions and signage before stepping out of his car. The air was cool, and the sun filtered through the high oaks in golden slants as he walked toward a bench near the edge of the walking trail, carrying nothing more than a coffee thermos, a worn paperback, and a calm, deliberate posture. Dressed in a gray zip-up hoodie and well-fitted jeans, Zeke looked like any man on his day off. That was the point. He had spent weeks researching locations with a history of casual police encounters involving people who looked like him. Black, quiet, alone, and in the wrong zip code. Walter Pines Park had made the list 5 times in 2 years. It was perfect for what he needed. With his glasses adjusted and camera quietly rolling from the embedded lens near the hinge, Zeke sat down and opened his book, an annotated copy of Baldwin essays, and began reading as casually as possible. He was not here to provoke anyone. He was here to exist, legally, quietly, undeniably. 22 minutes passed without incident. A couple jogged by with earbuds in, a woman walked her golden retriever, and a sanitation worker collected trash from the metal bins along the trail. Then, at precisely 9:42, a black and white cruiser pulled up across the narrow street beside the park's gated fence. It didn't flash lights. It didn't use a siren. It just idled, engine humming low, 2 officers inside. Zeke didn't flinch. Instead, he made a show of flipping a page and sipping his coffee. Another 7 minutes passed. The shorter officer exited first. White, early 40s, stocky, wearing wraparound sunglasses and an unreadable expression. His partner, taller and black, followed silently. They crossed the street and walked directly toward Zeke, who placed his bookmark between the pages and looked up, making eye contact without challenge. "Morning," Zeke offered. "Everything all right?" The shorter officer didn't return the greeting. Instead, he glanced at the book, the coffee, then Zeke's face. "You been here long?" he asked. Zeke nodded once. "About half an hour. Is there a problem?" "We got a call about someone sitting here looking suspicious," the officer said, pausing slightly before that last word. Zeke raised his eyebrows, measured in tone. "I didn't realize reading a book counted as suspicious these days." The taller officer finally spoke, his voice lower. "People get nervous. Just want to make sure everything's okay." "Everything's fine," Zeke said. "I'm just enjoying my day off in a public space, which I believe is still legal." The short one stepped a bit closer. "Do you have ID on you?" Zeke kept his eyes steady. "I do, officer, but unless I'm suspected of committing a crime or being detained, I'd prefer to keep it in my pocket." For a moment, the officers said nothing. A breeze stirred the pages of Zeke's book. The short one narrowed his eyes. "You think this is a game?" Zeke shook his head calmly. "No, sir. I think this is a constitutional question. Am I free to leave?" The taller officer shifted uncomfortably, but the shorter one leaned in. "You're pushing your luck. Keep that tone up, and we might start asking other questions." Zeke didn't smile, didn't move, didn't escalate. "I'm not raising my voice. I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm simply asserting my right to remain free from unlawful search or detention." The taller officer exhaled slowly. His radio crackled. A female dispatcher's voice came through with a new call. Unit 12, possible domestic on Myrtle and Easton. Responding backup requested. The short officer looked away, then back at Zeke. Next time, don't act so clever. Zeke nodded once. Next time, just ask if I'm enjoying my book. Without another word, the officers returned to their car and drove off. Zeke waited until they were gone before removing his glasses and pressing a button on the inner rim, ending the recording. He reached into his backpack, removed a mobile drive, and backed up the footage immediately. He annotated the file as Walter Pines encounter number 1 passive stop / no ID / tone escalation / exit without report. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't viral. But it was real. It was legal. And it was the first stitch in the net he was weaving, not with outrage, but with law, clarity, and patience. As Zeke packed up and stood to leave, he scanned the path ahead. He would return tomorrow. Same time. Different bench. Zeke Ward left Walter Pines Park that morning with a sense of calm that didn't come from luck. It came from control. He hadn't been arrested, harassed further, or physically touched, and yet the footage he captured was enough to suggest a pattern. Approach without cause, demand compliance, escalate subtly, then withdraw when the subject proves informed. That pattern, repeated across enough time and location, could become undeniable. But Zeke knew isolated recordings weren't enough. One camera and one man wouldn't change anything. He needed structure. So the next day, before returning to the park, he drove across town to meet with Amara Bennett, a civil rights attorney who had once guest lectured in one of his criminal procedure classes during his time at Northeastern. Amara welcomed him into her small firm's downtown office with raised eyebrows and a slow nod as he laid out his plan. He wasn't hiding his intentions. He wanted to document legal, but racially charged police encounters, using only lawful behavior and careful documentation. She listened closely, asked pointed questions, and finally said, "This will get ugly, Zeke. Even if you're right, especially if you're right." He answered without hesitation, "That's why I need you to tell me exactly how far I can go without crossing the line." Over the next hour, Amara helped him draft a portable legal cheat sheet, printed statutes, case law, and citations folded into a laminated card he could carry in his wallet. She also recommended body cameras legally approved for civilian use in the state and gave him a list of legal safehouses, nonprofits that would archive sensitive footage in case his gear was ever confiscated or destroyed. Zeke took everything seriously. That night, he installed a redundant backup system at home, one that mirrored his footage every hour onto encrypted cloud storage, and a portable SSD he kept inside the lining of an old army jacket. He also added a second lens to the temple of his glasses and wore a new mic tucked under his collar, recording to a wristwatch-shaped recorder synced to GPS. Every move had a mirror. Every piece had a twin. When he returned to the park 3 days later, he chose a different bench, this time near the community center entrance. He read again, same setup, same demeanor. But no officers approached. That was fine. He didn't want volume. He wanted consistency. Patterns. By the following week, he documented 4 uneventful mornings and 1 brief stop where officers asked if he was waiting to meet someone, and then walked away when he said no. Nothing dramatic. Still usable. Still part of the net. Then, while editing footage from his 3rd park visit, Zeke paused on a frame where one officer leaned out of a cruiser window, glancing his way without stopping. The face wasn't new. He cross-referenced the badge number on the sleeve with a spreadsheet Amara had shared, public complaint data pulled from public records requests. The officer's name was James Arlen. 2 excessive force complaints in 2019. 1 settled. 1 marked unsubstantiated. Zeke dug deeper. A friend in municipal records owed him a favor and confirmed something strange. Arlen's internal disciplinary report had been modified. The original file showed a sustained complaint from a 17-year-old who claimed he was forced to the ground and held at gunpoint during a routine stop. But that version had been deleted from the system, replaced with one that said, "Report withdrawn by citizen." Zeke's instincts flared. This wasn't coincidence. The footage he had of Arlen glancing at him might have seemed meaningless, but if that man had a pattern of conduct and someone had tampered with his record, there was a deeper rot than expected. That same evening, Zeke received an anonymous message through his blog inbox. The subject line read, "He did it to me too." The body contained a name, Tavon Miles, and a phone number. No other details. Zeke hesitated before calling, but curiosity and obligation overrode caution. Tavon answered on the third ring. His voice was guarded at first, but when Zeke introduced himself and referenced the park project, Tavon's voice cracked. "I didn't do anything, man. I was just walking home." Over the next 20 minutes, Tavon shared how, 3 years earlier, he had been stopped 2 blocks from Walter Pines by Officer Arlen and another man. They said he fit a description, cuffed him, searched his backpack, and found nothing. Tavon got mouthy, asked for badge numbers, and ended up face down on the pavement with a dislocated shoulder. He had filed a complaint but was contacted 2 weeks later by a department liaison who strongly encouraged him to withdraw the report if he didn't want to risk a future record. He was 16 at the time. Zeke asked if he'd be willing to say any of that on camera. Tavon hesitated, but eventually said, "I will. If I know they won't erase me again." Zeke promised him he wouldn't let that happen. After they hung up, Zeke stared at his notes. He now had a name, a pattern, and a deleted record. This wasn't just about proactive policing anymore. It was about concealment, corruption, and possibly coercion. Zeke didn't sleep much the night after Tavon's call. The words echoed in his head, "I didn't do anything, they erased me." That phrase became a drumbeat behind his eyes. He knew what had happened to Tavon wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, one that had gone unchecked for years. If he wanted to build a case that mattered, he had to widen the lens. The park was safe terrain now, too familiar. It was time to push into new ground. The next morning, Zeke dressed in the same style he always did. Neutral hoodie, dark jeans, clean sneakers. He left his car parked outside his building and took the bus 5 stops south to Brookgate Circle, a neighborhood famous for its quiet streets, white picket fences, and community Facebook groups filled with concerned moms and neighborhood watch warriors. It was a kind of place where an unfamiliar black man walking alone became the subject of whispered speculation before his second lap around the block. Zeke knew this because he had read the threads. He had even found 3 posts, 2 deleted, 1 archived, referring to a suspicious man with a beard seen walking past several times in the same direction. The man wasn't doing anything wrong, but in Brookgate, presence alone was often interpreted as threat. Zeke intended to test that assumption legally. He had plotted out a 2-mile loop that wove through the most surveilled parts of the neighborhood, past a private school, 2 playgrounds, a tennis club, and a community garden with signs that read residents only. He walked with his back straight, arms relaxed, no earbuds, no phone in hand, just alert, composed presence. His glasses camera was rolling, audio mic clipped behind the seam of his backpack. He made sure to smile politely at joggers, nod to homeowners walking dogs, and yield the sidewalk if space was tight. He never cut through lawns, never lingered, never made sudden movements. He simply walked. At first, nothing happened. The first 2 mornings passed quietly. He waved at crossing guards, greeted a mail carrier, and received only wary glances from a few porch dwellers. On the 3rd morning, however, the temperature changed. At exactly 8:47 a.m., Zeke passed a large white house with 2 SUVs parked out front. A woman in a cream cardigan was standing on the porch, holding a phone to her ear. She stared directly at Zeke as he passed. He nodded once. She didn't return it, just watched. He turned the corner, walking past a hedge-lined sidewalk that opened toward a cul-de-sac. 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled quietly to a stop beside him. The window slid down and a voice called out, "Morning, sir." Zeke turned slowly and stepped closer to the sidewalk's edge. "Good morning, officer." The man in the driver's seat had a neatly shaved head and mirrored sunglasses. His uniform was crisp. His tone was polite, but alert. "Mind if I ask where you're headed?" Zeke offered a small smile. "Just taking a walk. Public sidewalk, beautiful weather. Figured I'd get some steps in before work." The officer nodded, eyes unreadable. "We had a call from a resident who reported a man walking repeatedly through the neighborhood. Said it felt Unusual. Zeke kept his tone neutral. Is walking a crime in this area? Of course not, the officer said. But people get nervous when someone walks the same path day after day. Just doing our due diligence. I appreciate that, Zeke said. But just so I understand, am I being detained or am I free to continue my walk? The officer tapped something on his tablet, then looked up again. Do you have identification on you? Zeke blinked slowly. Yes, I do. But I'm not operating a vehicle. I'm not in a restricted area. And I haven't been accused of a crime. Are you requesting it under a legal basis? The officer's expression didn't change, but his fingers paused over the steering wheel. I'm asking as part of an investigation. Zeke nodded. Then may I ask the nature of that investigation? Suspicious behavior reported by a resident, the officer said. Repeated presence. Possible casing of homes. I see, Zeke replied. To be clear, I haven't stepped onto anyone's property, haven't taken photos, haven't spoken to anyone, and I've walked in a straight loop without stopping. If there's something else I'm missing, I'd be happy to know. The officer hesitated. Another cruiser turned the corner ahead and slowed. Zeke could feel the tension rising, not in volume or tone, but in posture. He knew how fast these moments could spiral. He raised both hands slightly, palms forward in a non-threatening gesture. I'm not refusing. I just want to be clear on the law. If you're detaining me, I'll comply fully. If not, I'd prefer to continue my walk. The officer studied him for a beat longer, then glanced at his screen again. Name: Zeke Ward. The footage from Brookgate had confirmed Zeke's theory. The uniform didn't need a reason, just an excuse. The officer had remained calm, polite even, but the questions were rooted in suspicion unsupported by action. Suspicion, it seemed, had become a currency. Still, Zeke knew that patterns weren't enough. The recordings, though legal and well documented, would be dismissed as anecdotal unless he could link them to systemic behaviors, specifically to individual officers with histories of misconduct. He needed access to personnel records, not summaries, not filtered PR responses, but the raw, unedited internal files of the officers who had approached him in Walter Pines, Brookgate, and future locations. So he filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the city's Office of Police Records, citing his right as a citizen to access disciplinary files, complaint records, and internal review findings on officers James Arlen and Daniel Moore, the two who had directly interacted with him so far. The response came back 6 days later, denied, citing privacy and internal security concerns. Zeke wasn't surprised, but he was disappointed. They hadn't even pretended to review it. They simply stamped it and sent it back. So he turned to the only people who might push harder than he could alone: the Hastings Legal Equity Center, a non-profit civil rights watchdog group based 3 blocks from City Hall. The center had a reputation for taking on city departments in court, particularly over transparency and abuse of power. Zeke reached out through their intake line and was scheduled for a consultation the next day. The attorney who met him was lean, sharp-eyed, and introduced herself as Cora Lane. She listened as he outlined his recordings, his denied FOIA request, and his broader suspicion that not only were certain officers serial offenders, but that their records were being sanitized internally. She didn't flinch. When he said the name Officer Arlen, she froze for just half a second. Then she said, "We know him." She explained that 2 years ago, the center had represented a 16-year-old named Marvin Devonte, who had filed a suit after being tackled and searched during what Arlen claimed was a probable burglary stop. Marvin had been carrying his school laptop. No charges were filed, but the case never reached court. Right before discovery, the officer's complaint history disappeared from the city's records database. The internal server housing use of force records was reportedly corrupted. The city called it a system error. The lawsuit collapsed without the supporting pattern of behavior. It had haunted them ever since. Cora leaned forward and said, "If you're building a pattern now, we want in. But if they buried one case, they'll try to bury yours too." Zeke agreed, and they began drafting a joint FOIA appeal, this time with the backing of a legal organization known for dragging skeletons into daylight. That evening, while organizing files for Cora's team, Zeke received an anonymous email. The sender's address was a scrambled string of characters, the subject line blank. The body contained only a Google Drive link and a message. "You didn't hear this from me. Check the logs." Against better judgment, Zeke clicked. The folder was titled Internal Access Logs _Arlen_more_2021. Inside were raw time-stamped entries, file accesses, login IDs, IP addresses. Zeke's eyes widened. The log showed that Officer Moore, Arlen's partner from Brookgate, had accessed Arlen's internal review folder 3 days before Zeke's FOIA request was filed. Then, within 6 minutes, the log showed a file deletion command issued from an admin account that was later tagged orphaned, meaning the user had been deactivated immediately afterward. In other words, someone had gone in, deleted internal documents, and then wiped their own existence. But not well enough. Zeke knew a few things about digital forensics from undergrad, and this kind of manipulation left fingerprints if you knew where to look. He copied the folder, encrypted it, and immediately contacted Cora through the secure Hastings platform. She called within 20 minutes. Her voice was low and fast. "This is big," she said. "Really big. It's tampering, obstruction, and possibly destruction of government records." "How do we verify it?" Zeke asked. "We don't have to," Cora said. "We send it to the State Inspector General. Quietly. Let them do the rest." Zeke exhaled. He chose his paths carefully, plotted them through public walkways and sidewalks, never trespassing, never stopping longer than a minute near anyone home. Each day, he changed the time slightly, alternating between early morning and late afternoon, just enough variation to avoid predictability, but not enough to erase the pattern he was building. Within 2 weeks, he had 6 more recordings. One officer asking why he didn't look familiar, one cruiser following him for nearly 8 blocks without engagement, one older man yelling from a porch that this wasn't the right neighborhood for him, and a woman who walked her dog the opposite direction every time she saw him, pulling out her phone the 3rd time and pretending to talk while sneaking a photo. Zeke cataloged it all, cross-referenced maps, noted street names and badge numbers. The pattern was clear. His mere presence triggered surveillance. He hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't touched anything. Still, suspicion clung to him like fog. On the 12th day, in a neighborhood called Calverton Hills, things escalated. He had just turned onto Bristlecone Lane, a wide, tree-lined street where each house looked like a model home from a catalog, when a black cruiser rolled up behind him, slow and steady. The window rolled down and Officer Grant, a man Zeke hadn't encountered before, leaned out and said, "Hey there, mind stopping for a sec?" Zeke stopped walking but remained on the sidewalk. "Of course. What's the issue?" Grant got out of the car, resting one hand on his belt. "Got a call. Said you've been circling the block all week. Neighbors are getting nervous. You mind showing some ID?" Zeke kept his tone steady. "Officer, I haven't stepped off public sidewalks, and I haven't been stopping anywhere. I'm just exercising." Grant's jaw tightened. "That's not what I asked. I asked for ID. Am I being detained?" Zeke asked. "Because if not, I believe I have the right to walk without being stopped." "You're obstructing now," Grant snapped. "I asked for ID during an investigation. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Zeke didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "I'd like to clarify whether I'm under suspicion of a specific crime." Grant stepped forward. "You want to play lawyer? That's fine. Let's go down to the station, figure it out there." He reached toward Zeke's shoulder as if to grab him. That was when another voice cut through the air, young, sharp, and angry. "Yo." He didn't do anything. Both men turned. Across the street stood a teenager, maybe 18, holding up his phone, recording. He wore a backpack and a black hoodie, his other hand raised in a calming gesture. "He's just walking, man. I've seen him every day. Y'all been hassling him for nothing." Grant stiffened. "Move along, kid. This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," Bettine said. "You gonna rough him up on camera? Go ahead. Try it." Zeke glanced at the officer, who now hesitated. The camera, both his and the teen's, were rolling. Grant exhaled hard through his nose, then stepped back. "Whatever," he muttered. "Just keep moving." He got back into the cruiser, slammed the door, and drove off without another word. Zeke turned to the kid, who was now walking toward him. "Thanks," he said. The kid shrugged. I ain't trying to go viral for letting some cop do dirt again. I've seen it happen before. Zeke tilted his head. You speak like it's personal. The kid paused, then said, my brother, Derek Miles. They got him last year. Said he resisted. Body cam went missing. We still don't have answers. Zeke recognized the name from his research, a construction worker who'd been arrested during a stop and ended up with a broken wrist. No charges were filed, but no one got fired either. I'm sorry, Zeke said. You think they'll ever admit it? Only if someone makes them, the kid said. You got a plan? Zeke gave a faint smile. More like a mission. The kid nodded slowly. Name's Trey. I got a drone. Good at staying unnoticed. You want eyes, I can help. That night, Zeke added a new name to his encrypted folder. Trey Miles, civilian ally. Together, they began charting zones with the most stops, noting where officers loitered longest. Trey would fly his drone over intersections while Zeke walked, capturing an aerial layer to Zeke's ground-level footage. The visuals started to stack, side-by-side views of Zeke walking quietly, and patrol cars slowly tailing from behind or looping back around. With Trey's help, the project gained dimension. The next time an officer tried to claim Zeke was acting erratic, Trey's drone footage added a new dimension to Zeke's project, one that no officer could explain away with vague language or unclear circumstances. The bird's-eye view eliminated ambiguity. It stripped the context of police excuses and replaced it with facts, angles, timelines, and incontrovertible evidence that Zeke's presence alone triggered state surveillance. Over the next 10 days, they ran a coordinated pattern. Zeke walked pre-planned routes at staggered intervals, and Trey shadowed from above, recording everything. They synchronized watches and radios, marked entry and exit points, and used topographical maps to identify high-visibility streets, with minimal tree cover to ensure clean drone lines. What started as a simple data collection effort quickly turned into a tactical operation. Zeke logged his steps, the exact minutes he entered each neighborhood, and when police appeared. Trey overlaid timestamps across his drone footage to sync with Zeke's body cam. Together, they created a heat map, highlighting how certain streets attracted police within 7 minutes of Zeke's arrival. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Then it happened. On the 4th day of their new loop through Ashton Ridge, a more affluent and gated section of the city with only 2 vehicle entrances, Zeke walked the loop exactly as planned. There had been no civilian calls to 911, that much they confirmed later through a public access scanner log, but 4 minutes into his route, a cruiser turned the corner, slowed behind him, and matched his pace from a block away. Trey, hovering from above, captured everything. Zeke said nothing. He kept walking. The cruiser circled the block twice, then pulled into a side street to wait. Zeke walked past, turned another corner, and 2 minutes later, a second cruiser appeared, approaching from the opposite direction. The officers never exited the vehicles, never engaged, but they coordinated movement around him like predators circling prey. Trey's drone footage showed both cruisers maneuvering in sync, flanking Zeke even though he had done nothing. No calls, no complaints, just walking. That night, they reviewed the footage together in Zeke's living room. The footage was chilling. 2 uniformed patrol cars rotating position around one unarmed man who hadn't committed a single crime. They're not reacting, Trey said quietly. They're hunting. Zeke didn't answer. He just clicked through frames, lips pressed into a thin line. He knew what this meant. The footage was undeniable. It wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about control, about sending a message. The next day, Zeke met with Cora Lane at Hastings Legal Equity Center and presented the footage. She watched it in silence, then said, "This is enough to open a federal oversight petition." Zeke asked if she thought the footage alone would bring action. Cora shook her head. "It'll bring attention. But to win a case, we need motive, not just movement. This proves they're following you. But we have to prove it's coordinated." Zeke nodded and left the office. He planned to release the Ashton Ridge footage on a closed forum for legal watchdogs and journalists the following week. But that evening, as he was backing up the files, he received a call from an unlisted number. When he answered, The voice on the line was low, urgent, and familiar. "Zeke, it's Marcus." It took him a second to place the name. Marcus Fields, his old debate partner from college, now working in IT security for the city's Central Administrative Division. "I'm only calling once," Marcus said. "You're being watched." Zeke's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "There's a memo," Marcus said. "Internal use only. It's not signed, just pushed through mid-level supervisors. It says to flag any footage, posts, or appearances related to you or that equity center you're working with." Zeke asked, "Flagged by who?" "Don't know," Marcus said. "But it's not just PD. It's coming from the mayor's office. They're scared. You're making noise. Just be careful. I can't say more." He hung up. Zeke sat in silence for a full minute, staring at the dark screen in front of him. Zeke waited 48 hours after Marcus's call before he made his move. He knew releasing the Ashton Ridge footage could escalate things, but he also knew silence was no longer a shield. It was a target. On a Monday evening, just after sundown, he uploaded the full 3-minute clip of drone and body cam footage to CivicNet, a decentralized forum used by journalists, legal analysts, and community organizers across the country. He titled the post, "Unprovoked Police Shadowing in Ashton Ridge, No Civilian Call Logged." The description was brief, factual, and loaded with timestamps. Number 911 call. No incident report. No interaction. Just presence and pursuit. Within 12 hours, the video hit 22,000 views. By the end of the second day, it had surpassed 60,000. People didn't just watch, they paused, rewound, annotated. Lawyers began debating use of force thresholds in the comment thread. Urban sociologists discussed environmental policing patterns. Journalists started DMing Zeke directly, asking for context, for copies, for interviews. But Zeke stayed quiet, refusing interviews, instead forwarding all requests to Cora and the Hastings team. Let the footage speak first. Let the system answer its own echoes. The ripple effects were immediate. A civil rights attorney from Denver named Geraldine Bloom stitched the footage with her own. In her video, she detailed a 2018 lawsuit where she represented a teenager followed by patrol units in a wealthy suburb for 26 minutes without confrontation. The case had been dismissed due to insufficient pattern establishment. Geraldine posted a follow-up the next day with videos like Zeke wards, where building the chain of causality courts refused to see before. By the end of that week, more people began uploading their own stories, some with footage, some just first-hand accounts. The tags multiplied. Hashtag walking while black, hashtag unseen surveillance, hashtag pattern not incident. Then, Zeke received a private message on an encrypted thread. The sender identified herself only as Meredith J. Investigative Reporter, SE Post. Her message was short: "I've seen your footage. I have documents. Not public, not clean, but real. Let's talk." Zeke didn't respond immediately. He searched her name, found dozens of hard-hitting articles exposing corruption in housing, healthcare, and law enforcement. One headline stood out: "Suppressed bodycam footage in the Harrington beating. Who killed the stream?" Zeke responded, setting up a secure voice call through the Hastings network. When Meredith answered, her voice was precise but low, as if always aware of being overheard. She didn't waste time. 2 years ago, she said, a whistleblower sent me internal memos from the 7th Precinct's command group. In them, officers were advised to maintain what they called proximity posture toward individuals who displayed confrontational tendencies. The list of criteria was vague: recording officers, filing complaints, posting anti-police rhetoric. And race? Never written, but heavily implied. Zeke felt his pulse rise. "You have these memos?" "Yes," she said, "but they were never verified. No signature. Just internal code headers. I couldn't run the story. Legal risk was too high. But now, with your footage, it becomes evidence. It shows the result of the policy." "Why now?" Zeke asked. "Because your footage doesn't just show presence, it shows choreography," she said. 2 patrols, same beat, no calls, no trigger, just movement coordinated to your body. I want to verify what I have using what you recorded. If it matches, we go public together." Zeke hesitated. He had started this alone, had controlled every file, every layer of exposure. But now the data was louder than him, heavier. "Send me what you have," he said. "Encrypted. I'll match it." She did. The files came in 2 hours later. PDF scans of memos labeled patrol strategy augmentations and community response contingency guidelines. One line chilled him. Subjects of prior resistance should be logged for non-engagement observation during field patrol, especially if unaffiliated with local residency. It was legal speak for what he already knew: surveillance without cause. Trey helped Zeke cross-reference timestamps from their drone footage with patrol car GPS pings published through the city's own accountability tracker app. The coordinates matched. On 4 different days, 2 different units patrolled within 50 feet of Zeke without external prompts. That night, Zeke met with Cora and Meredith in person. They sat in a back room at a community center behind shuttered blinds. They laid out the files, the footage, and the logs. "It's bigger than just you," Cora said, "but you're the entry point." The file included full footage from Ashton Ridge, maps with officer movement patterns, the whistleblower memos provided by Meredith, and annotated logs connecting cruiser GPS data with Zeke's daily routes. Meredith simultaneously prepared a confidential press release, not for public distribution yet, but shared directly with selected journalists and editors she trusted, people who had covered misconduct cases for years, but had always lacked this level of coordinated proof. Zeke, meanwhile, reviewed every piece of footage again, checking timestamps, verifying nothing had been altered. He backed everything up to 2 encrypted cloud drives and handed physical copies to both Cora and Trey, telling them, "If anything happens to me, release everything." No one laughed. No one called him paranoid. The pressure was visible now, palpable in how cruiser sightings increased around his block, in how unmarked cars idled longer near his apartment complex, in how the same 2 men suddenly started sitting outside the corner store across from his building every other night. The city hadn't responded officially, but it had started watching louder. Then came the twist neither Zeke nor Meredith expected. Late one night, Cora received an untraceable message from a city email address masked through a proxy. No subject line. One attachment. Inside was a screenshot of a group chat, officers only. The photo was a candid shot of Zeke walking down Brookgate Circle, his face circled in red, with a caption underneath, "Keep an eye on this one. Record if he gets mouthy. Chief says don't engage unless necessary." Beneath it were several reactions, thumbs up, laughing emojis, one skull. Another officer replied, "He's the one from the forum? CivicNet kid? Copy. He likes to loop same route." The image was timestamped 2 weeks prior, 3 days before the Ashton Ridge footage had been posted. The file name on the original screenshot was target_ward_07.png. Cora forwarded it to Zeke and Meredith immediately, noting, "This changes everything." And it did. It wasn't just passive surveillance now. It was targeted digital tagging, coordinated attention sanctioned by higher-ups. Zeke stared at the screen for a long time, feeling not fear, but clarity. This wasn't random. They had marked him, and now he would mark them back. The next morning, Zeke accompanied Cora to the Internal Oversight Board office downtown, walking through the heavy glass doors with a folder full of printed documents and a USB drive containing the screenshot and metadata trail proving its origin. "This is organized tracking," Cora said firmly to the board director, who took the folder without comment. "And it's illegal." Meanwhile, Meredith delivered a similar file to the Inspector General's office at the state level, along with a sealed affidavit from her whistleblower contact, confirming the memos were authentic. That same day, both agencies confirmed receipt and issued formal statements to the press that an administrative review of patrol protocol and internal communication platforms was underway. Though they didn't name Zeke, the implication was clear. But before any relief could settle, the escalation came. On a Thursday night just past 1 a.m., Zeke awoke to the sound of a window shattering in his living room. He didn't panic. He moved fast. He grabbed the encrypted drive under his bed, pressed the emergency uplink button on his phone, and stepped into the hallway with his back against the wall. By the time he called 911, the intruder was already gone, no items stolen, just drawers opened, files scattered, his camera equipment tossed but not taken. It was chaos with a message: "We know where you live." But what they didn't know was that Trey had helped him install a secondary pinhole camera behind the bookshelf, one not connected to Wi-Fi, recording on a local drive. The footage was clear. A man in dark clothes, gloves, and a hoodie entered through the window, moved with intent, opened 2 drawers, pulled out a labeled hard drive case, and after finding it empty, knocked over Zeke's file cabinet. Then he looked directly toward the bookshelf, unaware of the lens hidden inside a hollowed-out dictionary. Zeke handed the footage to Cora the next morning. She didn't speak for almost a full minute after watching it. "We need federal protection," she finally said. "We're past the city now." But the drive was already gone, and the copies already uploaded. The message hadn't landed the way they'd hoped. They thought fear would work. Instead, they'd handed Zeke his next move. By 8 a.m., Zeke was on a secure call with Meredith and Cora. He played the video, let the silence hang after the final frame where the intruder looked straight into the hidden lens. Meredith broke the silence. "We publish. Today." And they did. That afternoon, SE Post dropped the full story online under a headline that read, "Marked and Monitored: How Local Police Tracked One Man's Steps in Plain Sight." The article detailed the drone footage, the patrol GPS matches, the internal memos, the group chat screenshots, and the break-in footage, layered with expert commentary and a legal breakdown by Cora herself. Meredith's piece didn't name every officer, but it named enough. Within hours, the story trended nationwide. News anchors picked up. Podcasts dissected it. Community leaders demanded answers. CivicNet exploded with messages of support and outrage. And then came the first real crack in the blue wall. A lieutenant named Ronell Peters, long considered a rising star in the department's command structure, submitted his resignation via email, citing personal ethical concerns. It was no coincidence. His name had appeared twice in the oversight logs as one of the original recipients of the group chat thread labeling Zeke as a non-engagement target. While the department made no official statement, Peters' departure told the city what it needed to know. This wasn't isolated. This was orchestrated. The next morning, the mayor's office announced a public emergency hearing on civilian surveillance and ethical policing procedures, set to take place within 48 hours. Zeke received a formal invitation to testify. At first, he hesitated. He had spent months staying behind the lens, letting the footage speak, letting others carry his voice into courtrooms and newspapers. But this was different. Now, the people who tried to silence him were sitting under lights, and the world was listening. He agreed. The hearing hall was packed. Community members lined the walls, news crews crammed in shoulder to shoulder, and at the center, a long wooden table with a single nameplate: Zeke Ward. When he stepped up to the mic, cameras flashed, fingers hit keyboards, and for a moment he could hear his own heartbeat louder than the room. But then he spoke, not with anger, not with fear, but with precision. "My name is Ezekiel Ward," he began, "and for the past 3 months I've walked the sidewalks of this city, not as a protester, not as a threat, but as a citizen. I didn't film officers to provoke them. I filmed to protect myself. What I found wasn't just harassment, it was a pattern. What you're looking at today isn't a mistake, it's a system." He walked them through everything: the drone footage, the denial of FOIA requests, the anonymous logs, the group chat image, and finally the break-in. As he spoke, the room fell still. Even the mayor, seated at the far end of the dais, didn't interrupt. By the time he finished, the silence hung like smoke. Then someone applauded. Then more. Then the entire hall. It wasn't celebration, it was recognition. Outside, protesters had gathered holding signs with phrases like "I walk like Zeke" and "The sidewalk isn't a crime scene." The video of his testimony spread within hours. By sunset, federal civil rights attorneys announced their own review of the case, and 3 more officers were placed on administrative leave. The applause from the hearing chamber hadn't yet faded when the pressure reached its boiling point behind closed doors. In the 24 hours following Zeke's testimony, the Inspector General's office received over 30 additional complaints from residents who had once been stopped, shadowed, or harassed by officers in the same patrol zone Zeke had documented. Most had no footage, no proof, until now. Zeke's story gave them context. His data gave them teeth. Meanwhile, Meredith's article was picked up by national outlets. On morning shows and primetime interviews, analysts debated the legality of proximity surveillance, while civil rights leaders reminded the public that this wasn't new. It had simply been made visible. At Hastings Legal Center, Cora and her team worked around the clock to prepare formal litigation filings, while fielding inquiries from city council members, legal unions, and advocacy groups across the country. Then came the tipping point. On the third day after the hearing, the State Inspector General issued a public report declaring that systematic and racially biased patrol practices were employed under unofficial guidance disseminated via encrypted officer channels. The report cited Zeke's footage, Meredith's memos, and the GPS logs as central evidence. As a result, the IG ordered the full suspension of Patrol Group Delta, the same unit responsible for monitoring Ashton Ridge, Brookgate, and Walter Pines, and referred 5 officers, including 1 precinct commander, for criminal review. That night, as the city buzzed with news of suspensions and hearings, Zeke received a message request from an unknown contact named J. Rivas. The message was short: "You don't know me, but I used to be inside. They silenced me once. I'm ready to speak now." Zeke paused, then replied with a secure link. Within an hour, he was reading a scanned affidavit from former officer Julio Rivas, who had been dismissed 3 years prior after filing a misconduct report against 2 superiors, both now named in the current investigation. Rivas's testimony detailed how officers were encouraged to flag recurring pedestrians of interest, with unwritten incentives for identifying and recording potential agitators. His report had vanished from the internal system. Now it reappeared in Zeke's inbox. With Cora's help, Rivas's statement was added to the case as a corroborating witness, marking a pivotal shift from exposure to structural consequence. The city could no longer hide behind rogue individuals or isolated communication failures. This was a culture, and it was cracking. 10 days later, in a packed press conference, the mayor signed a citywide policing reform order, drafted in collaboration with the Office of Civil Rights and Hastings Center. The reforms included the permanent dissolution of the patrol units under investigation, a ban on non-warrant-based subject tracking, mandatory review of all dismissed complaints from the past 5 years, and the establishment of an independent civilian oversight council with subpoena power. For the first time in state history, a city admitted that its patrol model had not just failed, it had harmed. When Zeke was asked to comment, he stood at the podium and chose his words carefully. "This is not justice," he said. "This is the beginning of accountability. Justice will be when no one has to carry a camera just to feel safe on a sidewalk." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't celebrate. He simply stood still, like he had in every recording, and waited for the silence to speak louder than applause. That night, Trey joined him on the rooftop of their apartment building, where they watched the city lights flicker beneath the drone's soft blinking red eye. "You think it sticks this time?" Trey asked. Zeke nodded slowly. "It has to. Not because they wanted to, but because now everyone's watching." Below them, in living rooms and churches and storefronts, families discussed the reforms. Kids walked down sidewalks without eyes burning into their backs. And somewhere, another man picked up his camera, not to defend himself, but to show what had changed. Zeke didn't need to record anymore, but he still carried the lens. Not out of fear, but remembrance. Because he knew the sidewalk was never just concrete. It was memory. And now it was proof. The end. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to stay updated on future releases. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part hit you the hardest? Which twist caught you off guard? Let me know where in the world you're watching from in the comments. Your voice matters.